Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm Zias Caravala from ZK Research, and I'm joined today by Craig Sanderson, who's the VP of Product Management over at Infoblox. And I'm delighted to be doing this one because we're going to be talking security and AI, and there's lots and lots of chatter in the industry about AI, but I do think security is one of the areas where it can have the most impact. And so, Craig, just a quick bio on yourself and maybe an introduction to Infoblox for those who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, so firstly, great to be here, Zeus. So I'm Craig Sanderson. I'm the VP of Product Management for the security products at Infoblox. Been in the industry about getting close to 30 years now. So in the term we've been here at Infoblox, we've been focused on taking the existing DNS infrastructure, which is essentially ubiquitous across pretty much every network and infrastructure, and repurposing that to provide visibility and control. And the great thing is that DNS has great visibility into what threat actors are doing. The vast majority of malware uses DNS as its command and control. So just like as it's a control plane for your network, it's a control plane for most malware. So we've been focused on looking at that as a means by which we can provide visibility and control to mitigate malware and DNS-based threats. So we've been doing that for the last 8 or 9 years now, and now it's really starting to come to the fore.
Yeah, now you are, by all accounts, the market leader, I think, in DNS, but also in the broader DDI market, which is DNS, DHCP, and IPAM. We'll talk about those in a bit. But I do want to congratulate you on your recent launch of your AI SOC Insights product. And can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so one of the great things about DNS is that it has visibility, as I said, into essentially the threat actor's infrastructure. So literally hundreds of thousands of domains are created every day, of which the vast majority are malicious. So whilst that gives great new insights that most organizations haven't historically had when it comes to understanding the threat landscape and the threat vectors that they're dealing with, the challenge has been it's a big data problem because there's huge volumes of data. So there's great insights in there, but it's very difficult and very challenging. And very few security operations teams have much experience with DNS. It's typically seen as a networking platform, mostly focused on making sure the internet actually works. So what we've tried to do with SOC Insights is to be able to combine essentially the threat intelligence that we have, which is unique, focused on essentially disrupting criminal organizations, kind of targeting the mob boss rather than the foot soldier, as it were. We've been focused on that. However, that threat intelligence and the security events we generate do generate huge volumes of data. And quite often, if you're using DNS as a mitigation platform, it will block a lot of threats before it even gets to the firewall. So we really are at the head of the curve for this. But that then generates essentially a big data problem. You have huge numbers of security events. So combining the threat intelligence, the security events, but also because we're a networking platform and we're, as you said, a DDI platform, in a lot of cases, we are the DHCP service. So we know what the device is, the MAC address, the IP, the username, all that extra network context is also built into it. So we got a huge treasure trove of data and insights, which are unique and going to help customers improve their overall security posture. But we have to make sure that they can operationalize it. And with SOC Insights, that gives us the ability to absolutely do that. But we can only do that because it's big data through machine learning and AI analytics.
Yeah, and I wanted to drill down a little more on the DNS data itself. You and I were talking offline about this, where a big problem today is lookalike domains, right? And can you explain what those are? And I think in networking, maybe that's a lot more commonly known than security, but why is that such a problem?
So we've certainly seen in the threat landscape has changed. And one of the things that we've seen in particular is a big focus on lookalike domains. So what a lookalike domain is, so even targeted, like even us, so infobloxbenefits.com, maybe they replace the E with an I. If you're not looking carefully, that kind of looks like it's the benefits portal for Infoblox. No, it's not. So a lot of the threat actors are heavily focused on using lookalikes because they get very good success rates in being able to use that as the tip of the spear when it comes to phishing campaigns. And so it's very difficult for someone to know as well, Walmart.top, is that owned by Walmart or not? That's difficult for an average consumer to necessarily know.
Actually, how would one know?
How would you know unless you're focused on DNS infrastructure, which that's what we do for a living. It's what most organizations don't do. So that's certainly part of it. You also see attacks which you'll take on a particular domain, they replace the A with a Russian Cyrillic alphabet A. If you're not looking carefully, that looks like a legitimate, well-known brand or name. Turns out it's not owned by the person that you think it is. So because of that, lookalikes, one example happened a little while ago, they targeted the French social security system. And so Even though you educate people, you must go and use single sign-on portals because that's good security. Well, if you go to the wrong portal, you're going to put in your credentials to the adversary's portal. They're going to replay it and then use that against you. So lookalike domains is a very successful means by which malware campaigns or phishing campaigns kick off. But you need to understand what is a legitimate domain and which one is a lookalike. And how do you know which one is owned by the legitimate brand owner? Very, very difficult for organizations to know. So for a lot of the customers that we talk to, they have two problems. Number one, their own users get fooled into going to fake domains, get themselves infected and compromised, then used in downstream campaigns. Even worse than that is when there's a spear phishing campaign. So when they target the Infoblox benefits, how do an Infoblox employee know that that is the legit portal or a malicious one? So putting the onus on the end user to be able to figure that out is just not fair. It's not going to be practical. So understanding the DNS infrastructure, the DNS registrations around the world is an incredibly important way to try and mitigate and at scale some of the threats that are being used in what is now a very common tool, tactics, and procedure by adversaries.
I get things all the time. I look at my phone and just the phishing things that come through email and through text message, things like AmazonReturn.com or things like that. That you look at them and you think for a minute, is this right? But then you have to sort of correlate in your mind, did I actually order this on this day and things like that, right? And I've always said that if you make the user the integration point for the technology, it's going to eventually fail, right? And so it seems what you're trying to do is take the user out of it and make a lot of these things more automated. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also helping the operations teams be able to distinguish between what are essentially malicious lookalike domains, and there are other lookalike domains that are not necessarily malicious, but they are potentially, could be confusing to end users. So sometimes that ranges from, as I said, outright malicious. Sometimes it's completely benign, but also in the middle is, counterfeit sites where they're trying to rip off the brand. So there's a multitude of different kind of threat vectors, everything from brand reputation all the way to actually malicious protection. But we need to be able to provide that visibility to organizations so they can protect their overall infrastructure. And I think a lot of organizations struggle.
What's fascinating about this too, Craig, is that you think of the amount of money companies spend on firewalls and things to protect the perimeter. Well, I was talking to a penetration tester, and he was saying that there's really threat actors have gotten so advanced is they don't try and break into the firewall anymore because that's hard. It's much easier just to go in the front door if you've got the user credentials, right? Absolutely. And these lookalike domains are, one way to do that. And is it your sense too that businesses don't fully understand how big a problem this is?
Yeah, I think for a lot of them, one organization I was talking to, I asked them, I said, well, do you know exactly which domains you own? And they were like, well, we think we do. But one of the challenges that they struggle with is maybe 20, 30 years ago, if you wanted to register a domain tied to your company, you'd normally go through IT, and IT would be the only organization who did that. Well, now marketing organizations will spin up a domain as part of a campaign. Well, how does the security team know that that's actually legitimate? And if it gets linked into the rest of your DNS infrastructure, well, what happens when that domain registration lapses? Well, we had an example of a customer where the marketing team, they registered the domain, it was tied into the infrastructure, it was a resume site to try and do recruitment for a particular brand. When that domain registration lapsed, well, one of the adversaries just registered it for, $10 or something like that. And then suddenly got a flow of all these resumes coming from this organization. They then published that data on the dark web and made some money off of it. But it obviously was a very bad look. So for organizations, just having an understanding of your own infrastructure, comparing that to other lookalike domains that are trying to fool your users or fool your customers is a difficult challenge. And it's one that quite often organizations don't have a policy or process around. And to do it at scale and do it in an automated manner is a real challenge. And what we've tried to do is take our expertise and our visibility we have into all the domain registrations around the world to allow customers to get essentially their arms around this problem, which right now, a lot of them even struggle to have even visibility on.
Now, the concept of the AI-based assistant for the SOC or AI-based tools for the SOC isn't unique. There are other vendors that have done it, infrastructure vendors, firewall vendors, things like that. But can you talk about how the Infoblox AI offering is different from those?
Yeah, so one of the things that we try to do is because we have access to, for example, the asset data, we can also provide visibility and try and identify correlations between what sort of assets are being impacted. Is it all as one particular class of asset, or is it, relatively random? So the asset information plus also the threat intelligence context. So what we do in terms of threat intel is most other vendors will go off and they're chasing the malware. They're kind of chasing like the essentially the foot soldiers. So the problem with that, with hacking being largely industrialized now, that's really almost an impossible task. I mean, if cybercrime, if it was an economy, would be only behind China and the US in terms of size. So given that sheer level of scale, you can't really go after the foot soldier. You really have to go after the infrastructure. So with our suspicious domains, we're tracking threat actors. And so we know a particular domain, it may not be malicious today, but we know who owns it. And because we know they're going to use it in a campaign at some point, we can proactively block it. So we have that great visibility. We got that proactive blocking. We're not having to chase malware. We can kind of preemptively block. But still, it's important for organizations to understand the threat landscape. And given the huge volumes of data that gets generated, how do you boil that down from literally millions of events into some actionable responses? And since we're sitting on the threat intelligence, we're sitting on the asset data, we can uniquely do that. And we also, because we have visibility outside of an individual customer's instance, if you have go back to lookalike domains, a particular domain that is trying to impersonate your brand, well, one question is your security operations process will differ based on, is it a spear phishing attack, it's targeting your employees, or is it a broad-based attack on your brand? Well, we can, for example, because we've got 1,800 plus customers, plus we look at service provider data from around the world, we can see is, well, the only people who are going to this lookalike domain are your users. It's a spear phishing attack. So that will help the organization decide, I need to go and follow it as a spear phishing analysis, as opposed to someone's targeting my brand. So that sort of insights we have based on not just the customer's own data, but also the other data. But to synthesize that in a scalable manner, the only way to really do that is through some form of AI models to make sure it is scalable and to make sure that we can do it on an ongoing operational basis.
Yeah, and I think the problem, it seems, getting much more difficult. When I registered my domain names way back in the day, really the only options you had were .net, .com, .org, I think, and a handful of country domain names. And it seems today, with the .bizes and the .infos and all the other ones being created, it's so easy for a threat actor to create a lookalike domain because there's all these other top level domains available to these things. Almost seem invisible to the SOC, right? And
right.
How has I think when internet decided to do this, they were trying to open up more options for more companies because it's getting harder and harder to register a domain name. But it does seem like, from a security perspective, you're a SOC engineer, job's never been more difficult. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And this is why you can see the fact that, like, literally hundreds of thousands of domains are registered every day. Now, it's not like hundreds of thousands of companies.
For $6 too, right? On many of the
it's a relatively low risk, low regret investment from the adversary's point of view. And so it really is a challenge for organizations to keep up with this. I mean, how do you track all those registrations around the world? How do you classify them? How do you know what's malicious? How do you know it's tied to threat actor infrastructure or not? That takes significant levels of expertise. And so our data scientists and our threat intel team, who are exclusively focused on DNS, this is where you really need to understand DNS as an infrastructure and how it works to allow you to track and make sense of, well, okay, is this domain a high-risk domain, a low-risk domain, and why is that? So providing that context in the threat intel, when we provide incidents out of the events that we generate, we're trying to provide that context so that you don't necessarily have to be a DNS expert to understand this and to get value out of it. You can immediately start to see the patterns and work out what is your next step after receiving the incident. But to do that, it's done at such huge scale. You need the scale and you need the expertise. And this is why we bring all this together with the AI models we've been building.
Now, for most SOCs have obviously invested in a bunch of other tools, XDR, SIMs, things like that, SOAR platforms. Does your offering compete with those and replace them? Is it complementary to? Can you describe the relationship between what you do with what those tools do and how they interplay?
Yes, absolutely. So it's no plans to replace SIMs or XDRs or SOARs or anything. This is really to be able to make sure that the wonderful insights you can get from looking at the DNS infrastructure and using that as a pillar of your security strategy is we have to lower the operational cost and burdens of doing that. So Our job is to actually supercharge and improve the SIMS experience. So one of the SOC analysts that I was talking to, their challenge right now is the security data we can generate, including the network context. Every DNS query that you get from our platforms, we can tell you every request that device has made. Well, that's good, useful contextual information. But if we just send it to the SIM en masse, and the SIM is licensed based on essentially storage count, well, that's going to cost a huge amount of money. And still, the emphasis or the burden on the operations guy is to sit there and write the correlation rules, which you need the expertise and the time and the effort to do. So really what we're trying to do is to lower that operational burden so you can get all the value out of the really good security events, the threat intel, the network context, including the DNS queries, the DHCP lease information, but to essentially pre-package that up. So allow that SOC analyst who, when I asked him, how much time do you spend in your SIM just gathering and correlating data? He said, well, 80% of my time. So you only spend 20% of the time actually analyzing events. You're like, yeah, because I have to do all this pre-work. Well,
Yeah.
if I can do the pre-work using the AI models, it's going to make it a lot easier so they can be a lot more efficient, a lot more effective. And he actually said, just from a job satisfaction point of view, I think a lot of SOC analysts are very burned out, but it's because they spent a lot of time doing busy work. So really what this will do is it will make it a lot easier to consume the security insights that we're generating, making it very actionable, allowing essentially the operations team to then focus on potentially the macro level correlation, taking our incident and then correlate that with potentially other data sources. So really reducing that operational burden right up front. And in some cases, the other point is one customer said to me, well, could I do all this in my SIM? I said, well, going back to the spear phishing example I gave, well, do you really know like which users on the internet are going to that lookalike domain? Well, you don't even have that data. So we have access to that data. So by packaging that up in a reliable and consistent manner, be able to export that through our ecosystem into those SIM tools and SOAR tools is going to make it a lot easier for people to consume an insight and a data set which historically has been either out of reach based on either a lack of expertise, a lack of time, a lack of money. We're reducing all of those barriers through the use of AI.
Yeah, well, that seems like a real win-win, right? Because I think over the last few years, I think SIMs have come under fire. In fact, I think some security teams have questioned the whole viability of them because there's so much data and so much noise coming in that even the most seasoned security pros can't make sense of all the data in there. So if you're actually filtering out a lot of the DNS-related data before it hits the SIM, now I believe it's fair to say that companies can get more value out of the SIM and SOAR and XDR data or dollars already spent.
Yeah, that's actually exactly right. And part of what we try to do is to allow a kind of create a corpus of data to allow an incident to be investigated. But if you still want the additional context, all the extra data we have in our platform, then what we're continue to work on is allowing those SIM and SOAR tools to be able to then dip back in. So if you want to do forensics, you want every bit of data, you can go get it. But rather than just saying, well, we're just going to give you all the data, regardless of whether you're going to use it or not, it's just not cost effective. It actually just makes the situation worse. So by packaging up the right set of data to drive to an actionable response, that's our immediate goal. But without saying that without hiding the rest of the data, they can still go back and retrieve that if they need it further down the line.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. I certainly hope people understand the value that DNS plays now. It is your first point of defense. And it seems DNS security is one of those things that to me seems like a no-brainer. I don't know why everybody doesn't run it because it is such an effective way to get rid of a lot of threats before it hits you. So last question, Craig. Now that you've launched the product, again, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Well, what's next for it? What can customers expect down the road?
So for us, I think that the fact that we have a lot of that useful, not just the context around what's happening in the DNS world and the public internet, but also since we have access to a lot of the data within the customer's infrastructure, because we're, by our very nature, we're a DNS and DHCP and IP address management platform. We have a lot of information, a lot of insights that we can provide to drive towards risk and compliance and get really trying to assess what is going on within your environment. One of the things that we find a lot of customers struggle with is in your SIM, going back to those things again, a lot of your security events are all tied to IP addresses. Well, it would be great if I always had the same IP address, but I pick up my laptop, I walk to the other side of the
That's
building.
never the case.
Never the case, because I'm going to do something else 5 minutes later. And it's very difficult for organizations to really understand, well, what is the risk profile tied to this device or this particular user? So we're having a lot of that context. So I think that we have an ability, or at least the opportunity, I should say, to really start to provide greater insights around risk, tying also to compliance reports, but also helping a customer get a better understanding of their overall threat landscape and where they fit within that particular landscape. And we can do that from not just what's going on in the threat actor side of the world, but also from what your internal users are doing based on the context and the data that is native to the platforms that we're the market leader for.
Yeah, thanks. That's fascinating. And, certainly thanks for joining me. If people want to learn more about your AI-based insights, is there a URL or something they can go to? I'll make sure it's included in the YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to infoblox.com and look for SOC Insights, which is the name of the product which is coming out, then all the information is there. You've got some demo videos and some collateral that explains what it does. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's been a passion of mine. It's one of the reasons why I came to Infoblox in the first place. So I'm absolutely thrilled that this is out, and I've got a very positive outlook for the future in terms of what we'll be able to do. I think it's kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do. So I'm really looking forward to what we can do next.
Yeah, and I'm certainly hoping. I've been waiting for the security operations teams to really embrace this concept of AI and change. Right? I think it's one of the areas where there's so much concern that if you change things, you're going to break what's going on. But let's be real. I think the way we try to do things in the past hasn't worked and isn't never going to work, especially with all the data coming today, right? So I think the type of work your companies like you are doing is fantastic. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Zeus.
Okay. So anyways, on behalf of Craig Sanderson from Infoblox, I'm Zeus Caravala from ZK Research, and thanks for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time on another episode of ZKast.